Okay, we've got this set to record so we can upload it to our YouTube later for anybody who is unable to attend. But I just want to welcome you to our monthly Lunch and Learn. And thank you for joining us today. We're so glad that you're participating with us here with Missouri Community Betterment. I know that CC had already been asking for this at the top of the meeting. If any of you have had a chance to introduce yourself and which community you're with, thank you for doing that. If there's anybody who hasn't had a chance, who's just joining us, please feel free to introduce yourself and what part of Missouri you're joining us from. You can do that over the microphone or you can type it in the chat. Either way works.
Hmm?
Did everybody already introduce themselves? I know some people have logged in since the beginning of the meeting.
Well, I have not introduced myself because I just logged in. Jeffrey Corman with on the MCB board.
Okay, and then CC, if you can see also, we've got several folks here in the chat who've logged in.
I know Crystal Muir tried to say something and she got cut off. What else am I missing here? And Louise came in, that's good. Is there anybody here from Callio? I thought there would be somebody here from Callio. Okay. Thanks, Elizabeth.
Yeah, of course. All right. To go, oh, I see someone in the chat. Tara is from Callio.
Callio.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. So a lot of folks have had a chance to introduce themselves. I want to also introduce some of the board members with Missouri Community Betterment, some of which are on this call today. Not everybody is. So here's our board of directors. Tanya Watson from Buffalo is our president this year. Diana Huckstep from Louisiana is our vice president. Jeff Corman, who you guys just heard from, is our secretary. He's in Jeff City. Then we've also got Elaine Campbell from Houston. She is our past MCB president. And then some of our other members include Stephanie Pryor from Versailles, Jennifer Whitson from Steelville, Paula Holtman McCrae from Maysville, myself, Elizabeth Anderson. My office is in Lynn, Missouri. And we also have Emily Smith as our newest board member from Steelville. We've also got a couple board members not pictured in these slides. Brenna Bontrager is one of them, and our board assistants are CC Spink, who's been taking attendance for us today from Macon, and Kim Wright from Maryville. And then we have Ron, who is our treasurer in Mexico, Missouri. I just want to make everybody aware. I'm going to add this link to the chat here in just a minute once I finish clicking through some of these slides. But upcoming is our MCB conference for 2023. It is in just over a month, October 23rd, up at the Bradford Research Center Farm in Columbia. There should be information about that in our newsletters that you often likely get. But like I said, I'll also drop the link in the chat. We'd love to have you join us. We've got some really great speakers that are going to be there that day. So it should be a good resource for everyone. Our speaker today is Heather. Heather, help me with your last name. Is it Zoromski?
Yes, Zoromski. Awesome.
Okay, good. All right. I'm just going to pull up for myself some information about Heather that she shared with us. She is a lifelong resident of Southwest Missouri and has 20 years experience in nonprofit administration, grant writing, and grant making. Before coming to the DARR Family Foundation, she served as grants administrator of Skaggs Foundation in Branson, Missouri. and as Executive Director of Children's Miracle Network Hospitals of Cox Health in Springfield, Missouri. She holds a Bachelor's of Science degree in Child and Family Development and a Master's degree in Public Health, both from Missouri State University, as well as a certification in grant writing from the American Grant Writers Association. Along with her work at the foundation, she teaches adjunct for Evangel University in the College of Business and the College of Online Learning. And she serves on the boards of the Kyle Brunton Foundation, Elevate Branson, and Nixa Public Schools. So, Heather, I believe I changed the settings so that you have the ability to share your screen. So I'm going to try and stop sharing for just a minute and see if you can pull yours up.
Awesome. I'm going to try to do that now. Okay, let's see if this works. Screen 3, share. Okay. What are you guys seeing? Does it look like it started the presentation yet, or is it still?
So it's showing us your whole screen. We can see the presentation, yeah.
Does it look like I haven't started it yet?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, how's that?
It looks the same. What you might want to do is, if you've started it, try a new share, and sometimes it will let me click just on that presenter view.
Okay, let me do that.
Mm-hmm.
So we are going to go here, actually. I think, do you see my family at Disney World now? Do you see my family at Disney World? Okay. Huzzah. Okay, I think we're going to go. Awesome. Okay, well, welcome everybody. Thank you for spending a little bit of time with me this afternoon. I'm Heather Zoromski, and as they mentioned, I've been doing this for a really long time, and I teach grant writing workshops often to college students and to professionals like yourselves. And I've been asked today to give a pretty high-level Grants 101 overview that's going to hit on a lot of different topics that are specific to grant writing and program planning. If at any point after the presentation you have additional questions or would like additional information, you are always more than welcome to reach out to me. And I look forward to hearing from you guys. I'm glad you're here. So today we're going to discuss 7 different kind of topics. We're going to start with just getting started, how to start, proper planning with program development, common components, important considerations for budget development, tips to strengthen your application, common mistakes to avoid, and managing expectations. So before you ever get started, there are definitely things that you need to take into consideration. And I actually work with a lot of brand new startup nonprofits. And so these are common questions and common things that I work with them to tackle. So specific to grants, when you get started, it's really important to know the lingo. As in every profession, we have our own acronyms, we have our own lingo, and you'll see these oftentimes abbreviated or in acronym form. So it's helpful to know what you are looking at. So a lot of times you'll see a term LOI or concept paper. That means a letter of intent or a concept paper. This is just typically a 1 to 3 page document that is sometimes instead of a full grant application, or sometimes the very first step of a grant application where you would submit that to an organization. They would just either decide funding right then and there, or they would use that to filter through and possibly invite you back to submit a full application. So it's really just a shorter version. An RFA or an RFP is going to be a request for applications or a request for proposals. A NOFO, you're going to see this most often in federal opportunities. This is a notice of funding opportunity. A memorandum of understanding or a memorandum of agreement is going to be an MOU or an MOA. And this is a contractual agreement between you and a partner organization that outlines what you are responsible for and what they are responsible for, so that when you are funded, there are no questions about who is doing what and who is responsible for what. A letter of support is going to be different. This is not anything contractual. This is just a letter from a partner organization, a city leader, maybe a state legislator or a federal legislator, that's going to say that they are supportive of the program that you are working to implement because it's much needed in your community and they support the application, basically. You'll also see language regarding evaluation, which can be really kind of a dirty word in our world, and I don't want it to be. If you ever need help with evaluation, definitely reach out. But you'll see it oftentimes in formative versus summative evaluation or process versus outcome evaluation. Those are the same thing. Formative and process are the same thing. Summative and outcomes evaluation are the same thing. Formative and process is going to be how do you know that the program is being implemented the way you said it would be implemented? And then summative and outcomes evaluation is going to be how do you know that this program is successful in making the intended changes and meeting those intended outcomes that you have set forth. So it's more on the final end. Other funding opportunities can be called cooperative agreements. You'll see these a lot of times in the federal world where it's still grant funding, but instead of coming up with a program on your own, you're really just implementing the program they tell you to implement, and you're telling them how you're going to do that. You can also sometimes receive low interest loans or program related investment loans through different funders. And a prime example of this would be through the USDA. They have rural business development grants and loans programs called Red Leg Economic Development. There we go. Rural Business Economic Development Loans. And a lot of times in our rural parts, if you work with your electric co-op, there may be opportunities for 0% interest loans up to $1 million for capital equipment, buildings, things like that, that are really nice to have, not grant money, but 0% interest loans. So definitely better than a traditional bank loan. And then also there are tax credit opportunities especially through like the Missouri Department of Economic Development that you can apply for that is going to be similar to a grant application. Again, not funding, but an incentive to attract more funding, if you will. So another level of getting started is to know where to look. If you're looking for federal grants, you can go to grants.gov. Before you ever get started with grants.gov, you need to have, you can get started on grants.gov by looking, but you need to, before you ever get started applying for federal grants, you have to have an account in grants.gov and in sam.gov that will talk. So if you ever receive grant funding from a federal department of the government, then those are the contractual databases and pieces that they use to distribute that funding. If you're looking for foundation money, private foundation, public foundation, more probably what you think of when you think of grant applications to like the DARR Family Foundation, you can look at Foundation Center online, or Candid is also what it is called. Here in Springfield, this says it's located at the Library Center. That's not true. It just moved. So if you are ever in Springfield, there is a free database housed at the Carnegie branch of the Springfield Greene County Library. And you can literally go and log on and use their database on one of their computers to look at possible funders that might be a good fit for your organization. And I'll show you more about how to find out if they're a good fit or not. You can also go to the Foundation Center online website. And up in the right corner, there is a drop-down menu that says, I think it says like Foundation Center in your community. You can type in your zip code or your city, and it will show you who houses the nearest free location for you to access. Usually it's going to be a public library or a university library. You can subscribe as an organization. You can pay a monthly fee or an annual fee to subscribe to that service, but it is pretty pricey. So I typically just go to our local library if it's close enough to you to be able to do that, and do a whole lot of work at once. And then you can save it to a drive, or you can email it to yourself. Or if you have a library card, you can even just work on your own computer and save it to your own computer. And you can get a lot of information all at once and then come back to your office and filter through that later. The state of Missouri, each department in the state of Missouri is going to have their own grant application process. So if there is a department of the state that aligns with what your organization's mission is, what you are specifically working on, I would suggest you go to that state department's website and you can search for grants, funding, community. Sometimes just the keyword community will come up, and look at the specific opportunities they have. The ones that I work most frequently with would be the Missouri Department of Economic Development, the Missouri Housing Development Commission, USDA. Those are the ones I work most frequently with, but they all have their own system. And a lot of times they are handling pass-through money from the federal government, which is, it's nice in the fact that the federal government gives the state of Missouri a certain amount of dollars, and then the state divvies it up throughout the state, which is easier than trying to go directly after those federal dollars. It's a little bit less competitive. On the Philanthropy News Digest website, you can sign up for their weekly newsletter, and you can actually pick different topics that you want to sign up for. So every Friday, I get an email from Philanthropy News Digest with new requests for proposals that have opened up, sorted by arts, humanities, medical research, homelessness, and all these different topics, so that I can look to see if there is a new opportunity that has opened up that I might meet some criteria and be a good applicant for. So that's a really easy way to have some of those opportunities come to your inbox. You do have to watch. A lot of times you'll get emails for a very specific geography that you probably won't qualify for. So just keep in mind that they're not all going to be a win by any means. GuideStar is another great one that you can look up information in, especially if you have a starting point. If you've been to the Foundation Center online, you have a list of foundations that you want to explore further. GuideStar is a great place to do that. And it's just guidestar.org. You can set up a free account. You can search by the name of the foundation, and you can look at their tax documents and other information that is loaded in their financial documents and things, so that you can try to get a determination of whether or not your organization might be a good fit. And then we have such a great community foundation here in Southwest Missouri. They cover most of the southern half of the state. With their affiliates, there is tremendous amounts of opportunity with them and with their local affiliates. And even in the northern part of the state, there's other community foundations in St. Louis as well. So I would definitely explore ideas with your local community foundation as well. They're just a great resource in general. So proper planning, this is huge. Proper planning really does prevent poor performance, I think. Read everything thoroughly. So you've done your homework, you have an opportunity in front of you, and you have decided that it is a great fit. So now you need to make sure that you have read everything thoroughly and you know exactly what is going to be expected as far as what do you need to answer, what attachments are you going to need to gather and have on file. Make sure you are answering every question as it is presented, and make sure there is not any little fine print that is going to kick you out of contention, because that can happen out of consideration. There was one I had worked on a few years ago at the hospital that was on tobacco policy, and we had written it for tobacco policy and tobacco cessation. And later, we'd been working on this for several weeks, and we are fine-tuning it, reading through it again, and we realized that we cannot use the funding for tobacco cessation. It is ineligible, not a allowable cost. And so we had to go back through and remove that, not only in the narrative, but in the budget and in all of the attachments, to make sure that it was cohesive throughout, and then figure out what we were going to replace that piece with, if anything. So make sure you're reading everything thoroughly. Give yourself enough time. I tell people, depending on the size of the grant, if it is a state level grant, a federal grant, if it's a state level, I want at least 2 or 3 weeks. If it is a federal grant, I want at least a month, because there are going to be, even if you're writing around the clock and typing like the wind, there are going to be pieces that you are trying to get back from partners, whether you need MOUs or MOAs, whether you need letters of support from your community partners or your legislators. These things take time to get back. So make sure you are giving yourself enough time and trying to get those pieces buttoned up enough to send off for signatures first, so that you're giving your partners and community supporters plenty of time to get those back to you. Evaluation is another one that can take some time, just in the fact that if you need to hire an external evaluator, which is not going to be on every grant, not going to be on most of them, in fact, but if you are either required to, or it would be best practice to do so if it's on a federal opportunity, and that would beef up the credibility and reduce the bias of what you were doing, then it would be, you have to know how much the external evaluator is going to cost. And a lot of times they can help you write the evaluation piece of your grant application, which is super helpful as well. But that is larger scale. That's going to be more like your federal grants. So not on every grant for sure, but something to be aware of. Anything that is going to require an actual signature, you need to make sure you have time to do so. That's not super often, especially in the day and age of electronic signatures and digital files, but I've had a few that will require a signature of the board president, and then the board president is out of town or something like that. So make sure that you just are aware of all of these things that need to be buttoned up before submission, and that you have adequate time to get all of those completed. Hard copies versus electronic submission. If this is going to be something that is required for you to physically mail in, remember to give yourself enough time to at least have it dated, post dated by the deadline, hopefully before that, but overnight it if you need to, send it certified mail if you need to, do whatever you need, but make sure you are giving yourself enough time to do whatever they need you to do. Sometimes they need you to bind it or staple it or put it in a folder or whatever and send it to them physically. Again, that is not as often anymore in the day of digital technology, but something to consider. Electronic submission, this is going to be how most of us operate in this day and age, through an electronic submission platform, but also make sure that these are really easy to forget an attachment, forget a signature, submit an incorrect document, submit something with track changes, something like that. So make sure that all of that is buttoned up and correct. Double check your attachments before you hit submit and make sure that everything is correct. Get registered and set up in any of the online submission systems. So again, grants.gov, sam.gov, those are going to be your federal systems. Even there's a few that I've done. If any of you threw your hat in the ring for the yield lever of change, the Mackenzie Scott opportunity over the summer, if anybody threw their hat in the ring for that, that was a huge open call for $1 million gifts, unrestricted dollars, but it was super competitive. And I think they had 6,500 applicants, and I helped one, and we made it to the second round, and there was 3,000 applicants at that round, and then we got booted. But that was one that you had to get set up in the system, and then somebody had to approve your account. And so before you could ever get into the system to even start the application process. So a lot of these things take time. So even if it's online, make sure that you are in the system, set up, ready to go, before you even start working on the application, so that you have adequate time and you know that you don't want any last minute hangups, certainly before you start, when you were trying to submit. That's stressful. Know what you are looking for and do your homework. So if the funder has a website, you should definitely look at it. A lot of family foundations do not. So I'm going to show you how to get in touch with them. But if they do have a website, definitely look at them, look at their priorities, look at their deadlines, look at their geography. If you still do not have an answer, call them. I have a program officer disclaimer. I take a lot of phone calls. I try to be super approachable as a funder, and I get a lot of response. Sometimes if somebody doesn't get funding, I get a lot of, it was a good program and you said it was a good fit. And I did. I said it was a good program and I said it would be a good fit, but that doesn't always translate to funding. And so I always come with that disclaimer. And I always want people who do call and reach out to me to have done their homework. Every time I have an open grant cycle, I'll get an application from like Dallas, Texas. And I will let them know that they don't qualify because we only serve Southwest Missouri. And sometimes they'll say, well, it was worth a shot. And I'm like, was it? If that was not part of our geography, I wouldn't waste your time on that for sure. So call them if you still don't have an answer, or if you want to introduce yourself and see if they're willing to bounce around some ideas. Some are great about that and some are not. Some will just say, apply for whatever you need. So, but it's always worth a shot. I would always suggest too, especially if they don't have a website, and also if they do have a website, look at their 990 on GuideStar or the IRS website. You can literally Google IRS 990 lookup. And I'm going to show you here in a minute how my 990 looks so that you can see what things you can look for. But typically on page 10, you can see if they're going to accept unsolicited requests or not. At the end of every 990, there's typically going to be a list of grants made for that year. So you can get a good idea of what an average gift size is, and are they giving in your geography, and are they giving to organizations that might be in the same field as yours. And then you can see the amount of funding distributed the prior year or allocated for the current year. And then I just wanted to put a disclaimer there too. When you are looking at federal grants in the grants.gov platform, when you look at the grants.gov synopsis of a grant that you might want to apply for, it will tell you how many grants they are going to be distributing, what the award ceiling is, what the maximum amount you can apply for is. And that's important because there have been several that I've come across through grants.gov that they're only going to be awarding 2 maybe throughout the entire United States. And that may not be worth your time to apply for. That's going to be up to you and your organization, but that's not a lot of awards. So, and it's going to take a lot of time. I'm going to show you my 990 and then we can stop for questions real quick. So this is the DARR Family Foundation's 2019 990. It's kind of old, but same information. You can see here in the year or in the box there on box I that we have about $13 million endowment. And that is important because, again, sometimes you'll pull a 990 and their endowment will be like $100,000. So you know that they're not giving away a whole lot of money with a $100,000 endowment. So just things to keep in mind. Then if you go down further on line 20, let's see, that's 25, you can see that my contributions, gifts, and grants paid for that year was about $856,000. So that's a good chunk of change. So maybe worth continuing on down the 990. Here on page 10 is that box I mentioned that says check if the foundation only makes contributions to pre-selected charitable organizations and does not accept unsolicited requests. If that box is checked, then it is unlikely that you are going to receive funding. I have had some colleagues that say that they'll go ahead and send a kind of a phishing letter, an introductory letter that just says, this is who we are, this is what we do. If there's ever any opportunity to apply for funding, we'd love that opportunity kind of thing. And some of them have had some success with that. That seems like it takes a lot of time to go fishing. But if you have some time or you have an intern maybe that could do some of that for you, then by all means do that. You can see then that I have right below that, that's how Pete, there's my phone number. I do have a website so people can see that. And it's going to depend, what is contained in the 990 is going to depend on what this organization's accountant has put in the 990. But sometimes you can find some really good information about how to contact them. Even if it's a family foundation that is run by a trustee, an attorney, or a banker, you can find out how to contact them a lot of times through their 990. And then you can see here at the end of my 990, you can see how I have listed out the grants that we've made with the amounts that we gave them. So you can look at this and see, is there any organization on there that feels like it operates kind of in the same priority space, same field, and then also how much funding, what is an average gift size so that you can determine how much you could ask for. And then you can look at geography too. These were all primarily in Springfield. So if you are operating in St. Louis or Kansas City, you could probably determine that you may not be a good fit for that. Okay, I'm going to stop there real quick. Does anybody have any questions? And I cannot currently see my screen, so you're going to have to just holler out at me.
You're good for right now on the chat.
Okay, awesome. Okay, then I'm going to keep going. So program planning is another step of proper planning that I am a big fan of. And I teach a whole workshop just on logic models, program planning, and theory of change. So both of these terms are used interchangeably, but they're an illustration of how and why a desired change is expected to happen, a map of what happens between the program you want to implement and the change it needs to cause, and it keeps all partners moving in the same direction, providing a common language and common point of reference. 2 free resources that I have found to be very helpful that are free. You can Google them. I'm going to include another one in there too. So the W.K. Kellogg Logic Model Handbook is a free PDF download that walks you through a really basic logic model about how to plan a family vacation. But it makes it super easy to follow and just get you thinking in that way. The Grantsmanship Center also has a great training and some online resources regarding not only logic models, but they have a book called Program Planning and Proposal Writing. That's a great book, and I would suggest if you buy it, you get it on their website. And then also there is a website called Point K Logic Model Generator, and it is a free website. You can have a free account, and you can click on Logic Model Generator, which is on the menu on the left, and you can start typing into it, and it will build it for you. So it's a handy resource as well. So I like to also think about when I am going to implement a program or I'm thinking about a way to address a need that's been identified, I'm going to look for who is doing this already and who is doing it well. Are there best practices? Is there evidence-based programming? Because that's going to add a layer of credibility to what you are doing. So I'm always looking for what exists out there. I don't want to recreate the wheel. In my work at the DARR Family Foundation, we just built an agriculture school that teaches Missouri curriculum standards to 4th, 5th, and 6th graders through an agriculture lens. And we sent that team all over the United States looking for schools that teach through an ag science, ag business lens. We didn't find a whole lot. We found a high school, and we found a couple of schools that said that that's what they do, but it wasn't as immersive as we'd hoped. So, but it's always good to see what other people are doing and what you can learn from them. Another example, we have a robust system sort of tiny houses here in Springfield through Eden Village that is providing permanent, supportive, affordable housing to individuals experiencing homelessness. And that is being replicated all over the country because it's been proven in Austin, Texas, and here in Springfield. It's been proven to literally just, get people off the street and with a housing first model, and been a good program for experiencing homelessness. So if you don't have to recreate the wheel and see what's working else best out there and scale it and replicate it for your community, that's always helpful. It's always also helpful if you are able to include any sort of diversity and inclusion language. That's something that is becoming more and more common on grant applications. I've had to come up with diversity inclusion statements, diversity inclusion policies. They're getting more specific about demographics and for the community that you serve. And so anything that you have along those lines or that may set you apart is helpful. Systems level change, if you're working in your community, and there needs to be some, I think, education on a state level about what systems level change looks like in a rural community versus on the state level community. But if you are working to change the system in which this operates by working in policy advocacy, by working to change mindsets, whatever that looks like, that's great. And sometimes there's spending out there specifically for systems level change. Knowing how your program is going to be evaluated and how you are going to know if it's being implemented the way you want it to be implemented, and also achieving the goals and objectives that you need it to achieve, that is super important. It is going to be very important to know how you are going to sustain the program after grant funding ends. And maybe it's something that doesn't need sustained. Maybe you're going to purchase something, the end. Maybe you're going to run it for a couple of years and see the outcomes and the end. Or maybe it's something that is in your ongoing programs and operations and you're going to need to sustain it. They're probably going to ask you a question about what is your plan after program funding ends or something like that. And you need to be able to speak to it on some level, even if you don't have a great plan. I've seen some that just say, we're going to continue to seek grant funding. Like that's not great. If you can be a little bit more robust than that, that is always helpful. I've seen people build it into their budgets. I've seen people dedicate a portion of special event proceeds to it. I've seen people charge a fee for it to generate its own revenue to cover costs. A lot of different possibilities to cover those costs moving forward to increase the sustainability. And then make sure you are aware if there's any budget or matching requirements. Sometimes there are allowable and unallowable expenses in the budget. Depending on each application, it's going to be very different. And sometimes they're going to require you to contribute 20 to 50% of the funding requested. So if you just recently applied for any of the Missouri Department of Economic Development's ARPA funding, there was a 50% match on all of that. So if you applied for that, if you applied for $100,000, you had to come up with $50,000 as well to show that you had other funding commitments lined up for that program. So this is an example of a super, super basic logic model. And again, I teach an entire workshop on this, so more than we can get into today. But basically, it is just a list. You can think through your resources. So what resources are needed to operate your program. And this can be staff, this can be volunteers, this can be equipment, supplies. And this could also be, I always try to build an evaluation. So this could be, we need to build out a survey to evaluate the program, or however you plan to do that. I would build the evaluation piece across the whole logic model. So then your activities are just taking your resources. If you have access to all of your resources, then you can use them to accomplish your planned activities. If you accomplish your planned activities, then you will hopefully deliver the amount of product and service that you intended. Outputs and the activities and outputs to me are just like a checklist. Like we did this, we did this, we did this, we did this. Your outcomes are going to start to be very measurable. So if you accomplish your outputs, then your participants will benefit in certain ways. And I like to think of outcomes in like 1 to 3 years. And then my impact is going to be if these benefits to participants are achieved, then certain changes in organizations, communities, or systems might be expected to occur. I think of impact typically in like 7 to 10 years out. What is our overarching goal? I have used this for program planning, and I've also used it for organizational strategic planning. And so it's a great tool to not only do whenever you have a grant application due, but just to have it in general so that you can work on things as they come up and really flesh them out and think through them. So common components of most proposals. Almost always there is going to be an executive summary. I typically write this last because it needs to be a summarization of your entire proposal. And a lot of times it is the first thing reviewers are going to see. And that may be the only thing they read. If it doesn't catch their interest, if it doesn't align with what they're looking for, they may not read any further. I hope that that's not true, but that it could be. So write it last, make it very succinct and all encompassing of everything in your proposal, very much summarized. A need statement. So this is where you are going to cite the need in your community. Why is this a need? What is the need? Why is it a need? And make sure that you have appropriate data and cite it either parenthetically or in footnotes. If you need help finding data, you're welcome to reach out. I use a lot of, U.S. Census Bureau data, labor, and the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Let's see. I use, those are probably the two most common ones that I use, but I find data all over the place. But always make sure your data is credible. And by that, I mean, I have read a grant application that cited Wikipedia as a resource, and that is not a credible source. So just make sure that you feel like it's a credible source of true data. Proposal narrative is going to be part of it. And some of these may be called different things. Proposal narrative sometimes is going to be worded like, how will this program be implemented? Or what is it that you're trying to change? Or something like that. So, but there will be a narrative of sorts that needs to talk about what is the program? How are you going to implement it? Is it new? Is it an expansion? Is it modeled after a successful program elsewhere? A lot of times there's going to be goals and objectives. These are just examples. We worked on an early childhood and literacy initiative in Springfield, and our overarching goal, 7 to 10 years out, and it was not super measurable because it was so big, but our goal was to improve kindergarten readiness rates among Springfield children. And our objectives that were SMART were by 2022, 85% of incoming kindergartners in Springfield will be ready for kindergarten as indicated using the DIAL assessment. So we had built in that evaluation piece, and we had people going into the schools to do this DIAL assessment to determine if our kindergartners coming in were indeed ready. And then sustainability, how will this program continue once funding ends? There's usually a question about that. And then almost always, not always, there will be some sort of evaluation plan regarding how you're going to measure your program's effectiveness. How will you know when it is successful? There may be an organization description, a history. Why is your organization most qualified to lead this effort? And have you had any successes to brag about? So this is going to be your opportunity to set yourself apart. Budget, make sure there is not a specific template you need to use. A lot of times there is, and they want you to use their template. Federal grants use the SF424 budget forms, and I wanted to point that out because it's a very specific form that you have to fill out a very specific way. So if that is something that you ever get hung up on, you're welcome to reach out. And then your budget narrative is taking your budget spreadsheet numbers, adding specific narrative explanation regarding why each item is needed, with specific items outlined with specific costs. There's no guesstimating, or little guesstimating as you can have specific costs, have price quotes, have bids, whatever you need to button that up and make that very valid. And then sometimes you'll see the timeline for implementation is going to be a possible attachment, which I would just also remind you to build in time for hiring and training. So if it is if you're going to be funded on January 1st, but you need to hire somebody, unless that person is ready to hit the ground running on January 1st, you might want to build in some time so that you may not need a whole year's worth of salary and benefits if that person's not really going to be hitting the ground running and hired until March or whatever. So think about things like that. And then on the flip end of that, if you need to front load, timeline for implementation, or if you have to give a quarterly budget or something. I worked on a Healthy Schools grant where they were going to buy smoothie machines, and they had to buy those smoothie machines up front. So the bulk of the grant funding was needed in the first quarter. And so we needed to make sure that that was well documented in our timeline for implementation. Sometimes there's going to be a logic model or some other program planning document that you also need to include. They may require memorandums of understanding or agreement. They may require letters of support, and always look for those specific templates either on their website or embedded in the request for proposals that they want you to use that are specific to their application process. They almost always are going to want you to have your 501c3 letter attached if you are a nonprofit 501c3 as determined by the IRS. This is not your sales not your sales tax exempt letter, and I will show you the difference in a minute, but that happens a lot. They sometimes will want your most recent 990, and if you don't have to file a 990 because you are a faith-based organization or part of a church or something like that, then I always ask an organization to upload a document that just states that you're not required to file a 990 because blah, 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 blah. Sometimes they're going to want your most recent financials. Sometimes they will ask for audited financials, and you may not have those. If you don't, you might need to ask them if you can upload just your recent financials that are not audited, or that may boot you from consideration. They may only allow organizations to apply that have gone through an audit. So if that may be something you want to consider if you have not done that, although it is kind of pricey, but that is something that you might want to look into and consider. Sometimes they're going to want your most recent year-end financials, and some will ask for your profit and loss or balance sheet. Some will ask for your list of board of directors. Some will ask for an organizational annual budget, and sometimes they'll ask for an organizational chart as well. So I wanted to show you real quick too, if you do a logic model before you ever apply, how it can inform your proposal. So we go back to our basic logic model. And if you have filled this in, then you can look at your resources to inform your budget. You can look at your activities and outputs to inform your proposal narrative as far as how are you going to implement it? What do you need to do to implement this program? You can use your outcomes to inform your objectives and your impact to inform your goals. Then you can use steps 1, 2, and probably 3-ish really to put together your process informative evaluation that you can put into place so that you know that your program is being implemented the way you want it to be implemented. And then you can put in evaluation components to measure your objectives and goals, your outcomes and impact, so that you know that you are reaching your intended ultimate goal. So you can use your logic model to inform various pieces of your entire grant application. Important considerations for budget development. Make sure you know what kinds of expenses are allowable. Sometimes you can't include equipment over $5,000, or you can't include indirect costs, or just make sure you're reading all of that and you know for sure what is allowable. What % of your organizational budget is allowed? And I wanted to put that in there because I get a lot of brand new startup nonprofits come to me. And as a private foundation, I cannot fund more than 66% of their annual operating budget, or they might lose their public charity status. And I wouldn't hate for that to happen to any of you. So I sometimes get a reputation for I don't like providing startup funds or seed money. And I have to tell them that that's not necessarily true. It's really just a legal issue and in their best interest if I stick within that 66%. Indirect costs are going to be costs that are not in your direct expenses budget. They're going to be sort of at the bottom. Usually there's a line item that says indirect, and this is going to be for back end overhead costs. You can sometimes use it for occupancy for your building. You can use it to pay a person on the back end to track that data, to those grant reports, things like that. Typically, you are allowed 10 to 15% unless you have if you are working on a federal grant and you have a approved rate through the Office of Management and Budget, you can use more if you have an approved rate through the Federal Department of Office of Management and Budget, or you can use 10% of salaries and benefits, typically line items. Make sure you know if there are cost matching requirements. We talked about that a little bit. If you're asking for $100,000, but there's a 20% matching requirement, then you're going to have to know where that $20,000 is coming from within your organization. Sometimes you can use volunteer hours to use as a matching requirement, or sometimes it has to be a cash dollar amount. Again, look for a template embedded in the RFP or on the website that is a specific budget template. Make sure that if you are trying to purchase equipment that you have a price quote. Salary costs, I just wanted to touch on that because I worked on a grant one time who did not build in cost of living raises for the employees on that grant. And later they came back and went, oh no. And they wanted to go back and ask for additional funding to give those individuals a raise. And that's not probably going to happen either. So make sure you're thinking about that. Include HR people, include upper level administrators to make sure that everything, if there's something that maybe you're not thinking of because you don't work in that department, make sure that those are being included as well. Multi-year programs, that's awesome if there's a multi-year opportunity and you can apply for the multiple years of that program. I've seen some organizations step their costs down to try to increase sustainability, and I've seen some organizations that just apply for all of it across all of the years. So that's kind of up to you, but sometimes that is an opportunity, which is great. And the federal SF424 budget form, I have it in here, but we're getting short on time. So I'm going to briefly go over that and just show you what it looks like. This is just an example of one, like the first page of the SF424 budget form. There's actually 3 pages to the entire document, but I wanted to include that in the presentation. So you have an example. This is the template that I use just for an annual 1-year program. I include the total program costs in the total program, and then the year 1, or I add on years if I need to, over on the right, so that they can see if I'm not requesting 100% of the program cost, they can see what the total program cost is versus what I'm requesting from them to fund. And I've used that template all the time for a variety of opportunities. So tips to strengthen your application. I wanted to go over this. I do some reviewing as well for HRSA and I've done reviewing for Community Foundation of the Ozarks and Health Forward Foundation. And a lot of these are things that I have seen as a reviewer that are super helpful. So watch for those specific instructions. Watch for the word limits. Watch for the page limits. If it's not an online application system, watch for font specifications, page formatting, margins, page numbers, etc. If it is an online text box style submission, I always write it in a word processing document, edit it there first, copy and paste it over, make sure that it's not only edited to say what I wanted to say, but it's also appropriate in word character count, word count, whatever. Have those specific budget numbers, write specifically to each funder. I had a supervisor one time tell me that once you've written one grant, you've written them all, and that is not true. Make sure you can absolutely take information from a prior grant and rework it for a different application if you're applying for the same thing, but make sure that you are still wording it so that it aligns with that specific funder by pulling that same language in, restating their question, align your mission with theirs if you can. If they've got goals and objectives, align your goals and objectives with theirs. So it is so important to line that up and make that in as much alignment as possible. You can have boilerplate information. I use a lot of boilerplate information for organizational history, things like that, but make sure that it's updated and pertinent to each funder, because once you have written one grant, you have not written them all. And never send a funder a dear friend generic letter. Use language from the opportunity. So if you have room in your narrative, restate the question in your answer to start it off, or in a federal grant or a paper, like a word processing document application, I will leave the question in if I have room, because that way your reviewer knows exactly what you are answering. Because sometimes it's hard when you are reading massive amounts of grant applications. If it is hard to read, it may not get the attention that it deserves. So make it very clear, very concise, help that reviewer know exactly what you are answering and where that answer is. So just some examples I did there. How many individuals will this program reach? How will this program improve health outcomes long-term? I answered it by restating the question and putting that in bold so that my reviewer knows exactly what I'm answering and where that is. That helps you stay on track, helps you know what you need to answer, and helps the reviewer know exactly what portion you are answering as well. Use the scoring criteria to your advantage. This is not something that is within every application, but especially federal applications, there is scoring criteria. And if you can see that a portion of the application is worth a lot of points, then maybe you need to dedicate more space to that. I did one for HRSA just last week. I did a presentation, and the NOFO that they had me use, the first part of the application was worth like 50 points. And so it was half their score. So we talked about that, how that needed to be the bulk of their application because it was worth the most amount of points. Answer everything. This becomes tricky when more than one person is working on the same document. Have a system for that if you have more than one person working, and make sure that somebody is going back through and making it sound cohesive and all in the same voice and perspective. Be concise. You don't need to use fluff. Avoid redundancy. A lot of times, if I feel like I'm saying the same thing over and over, I'll even write something like, as mentioned above on, question 2 or section this or whatever, so that I can point the reviewer back to that section and not just say the same thing again and again and again and again. I like to think and write chronologically from what is the issue? How do we know it's an issue? What are we going to do about it? What do we need funding for? How are we going to implement it? How will we know when it's successful? And just kind of on and on this linear kind of timeline that helps me think through from start to finish what that program is going to look like. Cite any data that you're using or research sources, either parenthetically or in footnotes. If it is a text box online application, try to do it parenthetically. If it's a federal application or you're using like peer-reviewed journal articles, definitely footnote that. I have read a few federal applications that peer-reviewed journal articles were cited parenthetically, and it was like sentence citation, and it got so hard to look at and read because of the way that they were citing their sources. So watch out for that. Avoid jargon. Use acronyms, that's fine. Spell them out first and then use the acronym throughout. When I worked at the hospital in Branson, I used Cox Medical Center Branson and then CMCB. Have someone read the program who knows nothing about the program. Have somebody read your application as you're nearing finalization of it, so that if they can understand what you need funding for, then you've done a good job. I had a colleague one time say that he liked to come to the meetings. That's not necessary, but you can do that. Display data appropriately. And I mean by this, if you use charts or tables or maps, that's great if it helps tell your story. I had a chart in a review a couple of weeks ago that was so squished and there was so much information on it. I didn't know what I was looking at. It was really hard to read. Make sure that you are consistent throughout. So this means that your budget needs to match your narrative, needs to match any other attachments. Somewhere within your narrative, I like to include that funding will be used for this, and this, and that needs to match your budget, because I have read a lot of applications that as I read through it, I have no idea what they're asking for money for. I know what their organization does. I know what programs they run. I know who they serve, but I have no idea what they're asking for money for, which leads me to assume that they're asking for general operating support, or I have to go to their budget and dig. And you don't want to make your reviewer do that. Make sure it prints in portrait layout and in black and white clearly for those of us who are still kind of like to print stuff out and scribble on it. Submit it early if you can, and that way if you do realize that there was a mistake, a lot of times you can resubmit as long as it's before the deadline. If emailing or submitting through an online portal, save your document as a PDF. That way you know it's a clean document and you haven't accidentally submitted track changes or an older version or anything like that. And then double and triple check you have everything completed and compiled before you submit. Some common mistakes, including a sales tax exempt letter instead of a 501c3 letter, and I'm going to show you that next. Forgetting an attachment, submitting with track changes, using that generic boilerplate language, not being clear about what you need funding for. I've seen a lot of organizations, if it asks for a program budget and an organizational budget, they'll submit the same thing. I would suggest coming up with something for your program budget, even if it is just for general operating support. Come up with something and be clear in your narrative that you're requesting general operating support if that is allowable. Applying for unallowable expenses or too much funding is super common. Budget guesstimates, mission drift, which means that you are just applying for funding that does not meet your mission, or you are creating programs to chase the dollars, even though that program doesn't meet your mission. Be mindful of that. Don't do that. Submitting even though your organization does not qualify, that happens all the time. And then grant consultant considerations, I wanted to throw this out there. I get a lot of questions about how to hire a freelance grant writer, how much does that cost? And if you want more information, let me know. I have a whole network of freelance grant writers that I work with. It can be helpful in the fact that, for example, I talked to a lady not too long ago that had spent 40 hours working on a grant application that was going to be $1,000. That seemed like a lot of time spent for $1,000. And it may have been something that a professional grant writer could have knocked out in 30 minutes. Certainly not 40 hours. So keep that in mind. But then also I have a lot of friends who decide they want to be a grant writer because they want to maybe stay at home and they haven't spent time crafting their skills or honing in on their expertise, and they're not a professional grant writer. And I've seen a lot of organizations get burned by that as well. So let me know if you have any more questions about that. This is a 501c3 letter. This is mine from the IRS. This is my sales tax exempt letter. This is what I take to Hobby Lobby to shop for tax exempt purchases. So difference. Make sure you are submitting the right one. So time to submit, make sure that everything is signed, copies, attachments, compiled in order, paperclip, staples, bound, whatever they're requiring is my point. Make sure that it is buttoned up. And then if you're managing expectations, oh man, there are so many weird expectations out there about grants. I hear all the time that there's grant funding out there for everything if you know where to look. I've been looking for 20 years and I can tell you that that's not true. It's very trendy. It sort of blows with the wind of whatever, the hot topic of the day is sometimes. And then there's some foundations that are real tried and true. And once you get in with them, then you can expect some consistent funding from them. So I wish it were easier than it is sometimes. Also, it takes some time to get traction. So I tell organizations that if you apply and you don't get funded, try to reach out, get some feedback. Sometimes you'll get feedback, sometimes you won't, but you may try to apply again. And if they do give you feedback, make sure you are taking that into consideration, because I've had organizations not get funded. They reach out and say, should we apply again? And I've literally told them, yes, but not for the same program. And then when I get their application and it's for the exact same program, I'm surprised that they did not listen to the advice that I gave them. So facepalm. So managing expectations. I once took a grant writing class to get my certification and was told that after that class, I would have an 85% success rate. And that is just simply not true. There are so many factors that go into that, as far as is that the right fit? Do you have a relationship with them? I mean, just so many different things that's just not totally true. So definitely manage those expectations. Foundation Center online research. I would have organizations come back to me with binders full of print-offs that they had printed off from the Foundation Center online with things that they thought that they would be, opportunities they thought they would be eligible for, and then they would only fund in St. Louis or Kansas City, or they they only had $100,000 endowment and we're making, $500 grants to two organizations or something. So I wanted just to manage your expectations. You're going to get 12,000 hits at first, and then you're going to have to pare those down by really, really who's going to be a good fit. Operational expenses. I get a lot of questions about how to cover operational expenses with grants. It's becoming more common, but still not super common. Program staff's involvement. Why did I say that? I'm trying to think. Program staff's involvement. Oh, I would just make sure that your program staff who is going to be implementing the program knows exactly what they are getting into. I have worked with teams that we get this big federal grant. They want the money. It sounds great. And then they go to implement the program and they realize how much time it is actually going to take, how time consuming it is. Continuous funding expectations. That continuous funding is never guaranteed. It depends on so many things. So I would never add it into your budget forever.
Heather, I think you froze up a little bit.
Was this only a 1 hour or, I think it's Google, not Zoom, right?
I mean, it is 1 hour, but we shouldn't, I mean, we're all still here.
Right, we are. Yeah.
Let's just give her another minute to potentially log back on just in case she's having connectivity issues.
Okay. I have a graphic bar across the bottom. Can somebody tell me what it says just above guaranteed?
Yeah, give me 1 sec. Oh, that's just her on her screen saying that she's sharing screen.
I just wondered what it said. It said click submit, and then it has that baby's face, and then it says guaranteed. And I wondered if that just said, regret guaranteed or what it said, but I can't get this dialogue box to go away.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well,
it's not important, but I just
because we are here at our hour mark, and I want to be respectful of everybody's time. I'm gonna go ahead and take the screen share back over just in case Heather's fully dropped off. Give me 1 second. And we can wrap this up. If anybody has here, let me back this up actually. If anybody has any further questions for Heather that she wasn't able to answer for you today in her presentation, please feel free to reach out to one of us on the Missouri Community Betterment Board, and we can forward those to Heather and connect her with you. I see Chip has asked if these slides will be available. That's a good question. We can forward that on to Heather and ask if she would be willing to share them. And then we're also going to post this recording on our MCB YouTube page. I know that's not quite the same as having the slides in hand to flip through. Other than that, just some last housekeeping things so that I can give you guys back the rest of your Wednesday afternoon. MCB continues to make a lasting impact through the MCB Better Together Fund, and there's some information on there if you are interested in supporting. This is how you can get a hold of us. There's our website, our email, our YouTube, like I mentioned, and our Facebook. This slide says join us next month, but when we say that, we mean in person at our conference. And here in the chat is the, oops, I just sent that directly to Heather, not to everybody. Hang on 1 second. Okay, here is the link to register for the conference in October in Columbia. Can you email the recording link to those registered? Sure, I can do that. After our conference, we've got 2 more lunch and learns coming up this year on November 15th and December 20th. So we invite you to join us for those as well, and register for those. And then there's just the information about the date and location of our conference again. We hope that you guys can join us there. And Elizabeth, I hope you have a good rest of your Wednesday.
Elizabeth?
Yes.
I'm sorry. I just picked up on something. Just for the record, the address there is 4968 Range Line Road, RANGELINE, and not Ridge Line.
Gotcha.
Okay.
Make
a difference to anybody.
All right.
It could make a difference.
Thank you for catching that, Jeff.
Yeah.
All right. That is all we have for today. Like I said, I really strongly encourage you, if you have some questions that we didn't get to, send them to us, and we'll be happy to connect you with Heather. And we really appreciate her sharing her extensive knowledge with us today. And I hope you have a good rest of your day.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.